Gonzaga has focused almost entirely on guards in the transfer portal, but there's a stretch four that makes plenty of sense for the Zags to bring to Spokane.
You are Locked On Zags, your daily podcast on the Gonzaga Bulldogs. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What is going on, y'all? Happy Wednesday, and welcome into the Locked On Zags podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. I'm your host and longtime Gonzaga podcaster, Andy Patton, here to bring you news and updates on all things Zag athletics. Well, folks, it is WCC Wednesday, so we're going to take a look at the latest transfer portal edition for a bottom feeder team that they might be a little bit on the rise. We'll get to that to close out the show. We're also going to discuss the latest workouts for Ryan Nembhard and Ben Gregg as they're going through the pre-draft process. We'll also talk a little bit about Nolan Hickman and Caleb Battle as well. But first, we're back talking transfer portal targets for Mark Few and the Gonzaga Bulldogs. We know that the roster is very close to being finalized right now after the Zags edition last week of Grand Canyon transfer wing Tyon Grant Foster. We know the Zags are reportedly rumored to be adding Mario Saint-Superi, a 6'3", 19-year-old guard from Spain, who would probably be the last rotation type addition for this Gonzaga team. I'm not sure how much he would play in year one behind guard Braden Smith, as well as Adam Miller and Grant Foster and Jalen Warley and Emmanuel Innocente and Davis Fogel and the rest of that backcourt. But one area where Gonzaga really hasn't done a lot of digging in the transfer portal is in the front court. And that's for justifiable reasons. Of course, the biggest news of the offseason for Gonzaga arguably is the fact that both Graham Ike and Braden Huff returned for the Zags and will both start in the front court this upcoming season. Ismaila Diani is back and expected to take on a bigger role as a sophomore. And then, of course, Parker Jefferson, the incoming freshman who is a Minnesota decommit, will be joining the team next year as well. So we're not going to pretend there's a ton of room. There's a ton of space for more players on this Gonzaga team. But one area where there could be a potential addition for the Zags would be as like an experienced stretch four type player, somebody who can space the floor, who can kind of play that more traditional power forward role in Mark Few's offense, the role that we saw Ben Gregg and Anton Watson play very capably in the last half decade or so combined for those two guys. And so the player I want to talk about today is a potential target they could pursue in the portal who does exactly that, and that is Fordham transfer forward Romad Dean. And I apologize if you're looking at the notes. It says Roman on the YouTube page, but it is Romad, R-O-M-A-D. Dean, he's a 6'7", so a little undersized, but a 6'7" senior forward. He's actually from the Bahamas initially, but he played his high school basketball in Canada at Crestwood Prep in Toronto. We know Gonzaga has a strong connection and pipeline with some of those Canadian high schools. Crestwood is a place that has had a lot of basketball success in the past, so there is a bit of a connection there, not as direct, but certainly anybody who played in Canada is going to potentially catch the eye of the Zags. We know that that's something that they prioritize in the transfer portal and in the regular international recruiting as well. Dean was a zero-star recruit out of high school. He landed at Fordham in the Atlantic 10 Conference, a very good basketball conference, pretty on par, I'd say, with the WCC. It's kind of the Power 5 conferences, and then the Mountain West, WCC, A10, kind of all in that next grouping with the American Athletic Conference kind of floating around there as well. He landed at Fordham as a freshman in the 22-23 season, played 33 games as a true freshman, only played about 7 minutes per game, didn't put up particularly great numbers, but then played much more as a sophomore at Fordham. Dean did 33 games, started 15 of them, played about 17 minutes per game. And that season, he averaged about 5 points, 4 boards, shot very efficient from the field, 56% on his 2-point attempts, and then about 33% from three. And that was on 2.5 3-point attempts per game. And then this past year, we saw Dean kind of blossom into a full-time starter as opposed to starting just half the games. And played more minutes. And he went from 6.5 minutes per game as a freshman to 16.5 minutes per game as a sophomore to 26.5 minutes per game as a junior. So a pretty steady 10-minute per game increase for Dean in his 3 years at Fordham. And this past year, he averaged about 7 points, 5.5 boards, again, was 56% on 2-pointers, literally exactly the same as the previous year. The 3-point percentage boosted slightly from 33% as a sophomore to 34.2%. as a junior. That was on 3.5 attempts per game. He also shot 73% from the free throw line, albeit only on a little over 1 attempt per game. He had some big games. Fordham didn't play a ton of high major opponents, but they did play Penn State in the non-conference, and Dean had 13 points, 9 boards on 5 of 10 shooting in that game. They also played San Francisco. He had a decent game, and he had 8 points, 5 boards in that one. And then against Rhode Island in the A-10 tournament, a must-win elimination game for Fordham. Dean helped lead the Rams to a win in that one, 14 points, 6 boards. He was actually only 2 of 3 from the field in that game, but 8 of 9 from the free throw line. So while on the season he wasn't a particularly prolific free throw shooter, he certainly got it done in a must-win game when it counted for the Rams in that A-10 tournament. For Dean, all told, is 34% from 3 in the last 2 years combined. That's on about 3 attempts per game. So it's not like a massive volume. It's, we're not talking like Caleb Love or anything like that, where you're launching 6-8 threes per game, but he took a lot more threes than he took twos during his time at Fordham. And for a guy who played, relatively small role minutes wise, for him to be shooting 2 to 3 threes per game, knocking him down at, again, not an elite clip, but 33%, you kind of got to expect there could be some potential Ryan Woolridge effect here. Again, for those who are newer listeners, Ryan Woolridge effect is named after Ryan Woolridge, of course, who was at Gonzaga about a half decade ago, who shot about 33% from 3 in his 3 years at North Texas, transferred to Gonzaga and shot 43% from 3. So we named this after him, as players who come to a different system that's more open, that's where the defense is more focused on the front court, and you get more open looks from 3. And Ryan Woolridge is the namesake, but Malachi Smith shot better from 3 at Gonzaga. Rasir Bolton shot better from 3 at Gonzaga. There's many others who transfer to Gonzaga, and that 3-point shooting takes a boost in the positive direction when they are not quite as big of a focal point offensively. Now, at this point, there's not a direct connection between Gonzaga and Romad Dean. He did visit Colorado earlier in the transfer portal cycle. That's the known visit for Dean at this point out of the transfer portal. A recent post from about two weeks ago from the Portal Report on May 17th indicated that the latest schools to reach out to Dean were Cincinnati, Virginia, New Mexico State, Tulsa, UAB, and Samford. He's also been connected to a handful of WCC schools in LMU, Oregon State, and Portland, as well as a future Pac-12 opponent in Fresno State. Duquesne from the A-10 and Iona have expressed interest as well. So not a lot of premier high major programs necessarily, although Virginia, Cincy, and Colorado are, of course, all high major programs, but certainly getting some interest from a litany of good programs. This isn't just a bunch of 300 Ken Pom teams that are showing interest. It's some quality teams, quality mid-major teams, and some decently good high major programs as well that are showing interest. Obviously, we already mentioned for Gonzaga, one of the connections here potentially could be that pipeline out of Canada, as we've seen them recruit quite well internationally. And while he would be a transfer addition, not an international freshman addition, he just still does have that international pedigree, which could be of interest to the Zags. Now, in terms of his fit in Spokane, again, there's not a role available right now that is super significant, but there is the chance to come in and compete for some fourth big minutes where you'd be competing alongside the true freshman, Parker Jefferson. Parker Jefferson is 6'10". He's obviously got more size than Dean, who's listed at 6'7". But at this point for the Zags, I think a stretch 4 who can rebound well and hit open threes could be appealing to Mark Few's club. It's kind of something they don't really have on the roster. I don't think they view Steele Venters as an option to play the 4, even though he would fit as a floor spacer. He's not a great rebounder or a great defender. Jalen Warley is a very, very good defender, but he took 7 threes in his junior season at Florida State. He is not a floor spacer whatsoever, and he's more of a facilitator, and I think would be better utilized in a role where he has the ball in his hands, which is not necessarily the fit at that power forward spot. So to me, I see a player who's a willing 3-point shooter who likes to take threes, who I think would be somebody who would knock down open threes in Gonzaga's system. He's a very good rebounder, specifically a very good defensive rebounder. So I think you can kind of squint and see somebody who could adequately fill a fourth big role, despite being a little bit smaller in size, who could, play 10, 15 minutes per game off the bench, knock down some open threes, hustle for some rebounds. There's a role here. Now, he has to want it. And the other programs on this list, even the high major programs, are very likely offering more playing time than Gonzaga would be able to offer him here. So that, to me, is how this conversation starts. And if he says, oh, I'm looking to go somewhere, where I can play 25, 30 minutes per game, then Gonzaga says, okay, thank you. If you change your mind on that, let us know. And that's the end of that conversation. But if he wants to go somewhere where he can win a championship, compete for a championship, win a conference title, be in the NCAA tournament, which he hasn't done in his career, you could do a heck of a lot worse than coming to Gonzaga for your senior year, polishing up your degree, playing some nice minutes off the bench. Like, I think it makes some sense. And there are other players who kind of fit this mold in the transfer portal. But of the ones I looked at, Dean was the one that was most appealing to me. And I think could be an interesting target for Gonzaga if they wanted to look in that direction. Well, folks, we're going to move on from the transfer portal. We're going to talk about the two Zags who have known pre-draft workouts in the books out of Gonzaga. That is Ryan Nembhard and Ben Gregg. Nembhard backing up Steph Curry in Golden State, potentially. Ben Gregg playing for his hometown team, the Portland Trailblazers. We got more on that coming up in just a second. But first, folks, the NBA Finals coming up in just one day. We'll have a big preview of that on Thursday's show. And every night in these NBA playoffs has delivered highlight-worthy performances, major momentum shifts, and can't-miss moments. Whether it's a game-winning shot, what up Tyrese Halliburton, whether it's a breakout player, there's never been a better time than right now to get in on all the action. And FanDuel makes it easy to stay in the game both before tip-off and live. Whether it's player props, performance trends, and same-game parlays, fans have more ways than ever to play smart and win big. And if you're looking ahead, you're feeling real good about this Gonzaga roster. Their odds to take home the national championship, they were at plus 4,000. You can make some big money now. They're a little bit lower, still at plus 3,000 though, so it's a good time to get in while the getting is good. And folks, if you're new to FanDuel, it's the perfect time to sign up. Head to FanDuel.com now and place your first $5 bet. If it wins, you'll get $200 in bonus bets. Make every moment more with FanDuel, an official sports betting partner of the NBA. All right, folks, segment 2, still Andy Patton, still Locked On Zags podcast, and it is officially workout season here on Locked On Zags as we are talking about Ryan Nembhard, Ben Gregg, Caleb Battle, and Nolan Hickman as they are all awaiting the 2025 NBA draft, which will take place later this month in June. I think the 27th and the 28th are the 2 days of the draft. And while we're only really expecting one of those four players to actually get selected in the NBA draft, shortly after the draft, we would not be surprised at all to see Ben Gregg and Caleb Battle and Nolan Hickman sign summer league deals, get the opportunity to compete in Las Vegas for a chance to get a potentially a two-way contract, or at very least invited to training camp and potentially find their way into the G League for next year. If that's what they want, they could also, of course, look internationally as well. But right now is the time of the year where players are working out individually with teams, as those teams get individual looks at each of these players to kind of determine their draft order before late June. So the update on Ryan Nembhard, he worked out with the Golden State Warriors at the Chase Center on Tuesday, June 3rd. He worked out alongside Duke wing Sion James and CJ Huntley from App State. Workout again at the Chase Center. The last time Ryan Nembhard was at the Chase Center, he dropped 16 assists to tie a program record against San Francisco in Gonzaga's big-time win over the Dons. Golden State only has one pick in this draft. It is at number 41. That is right within the realm of kind of where Ryan Nembhard is being mocked right now. Again, for most of this offseason, Ryan Nembhard has not been on NBA mock drafts, but in part because of his performance at the G League Elite Camp, followed by his performance at the NBA Draft Combine, where he shot really well. He played well in the scrimmages. At that point, Nembhard started to move up onto draft boards, and then we had so many players pull out of the draft process, including guards like Milos Uzan, LeBaron Philon, Tahad Pettiford. Those guys pulling out of the draft meant there was less guards to choose from in the draft process, which certainly increases the odds of Ryan Nembhard getting selected. Let's not pretend it's not helping him either. The fact that his brother Andrew is having a big old moment right now with the Indiana Pacers. He was a huge part of their 6-game series win over the New York Knicks in the Eastern Conference Finals and played tremendously in that closing out game. 6 steals, 8 assists, 14 points for him in that game. So the combination of Ryan's strong performances at the workouts, Andrew's strong performance in the NBA, less talent being available in the draft, has taken Nembhard from it's probably not going to get drafted to now pretty much any mock draft that has come out in the last couple of days has featured Ryan Nembhard. And for the most part, he is showing up in the 40s, not in the 50s. So 41, very much a possible spot for him to get drafted. Sion James, by the way, from Duke is also kind of showing up in that same spot. So it does feel like Golden State was bringing in some guys that kind of might fit the bill for them at number 41 overall. Huntley is probably more of an undrafted free agent target for them, but still, Ryan's getting an opportunity to compete against guys. And Sion James is a phenomenal defensive player, so I think there's a chance. He's not really a one necessarily. He's more of a three. But, for the Golden State Warriors, they want to see Ryan Nembhard going up against a bigger physical guard, and Sion James is very much that. Again, for Nembhard, this is an opportunity to prove himself, to prove his worth against NBA caliber players in the scrimmages and in front of NBA scouts, in front of team personnel. And it's his second workout for Nembhard. He also worked out with the Atlanta Hawks previously. Atlanta only has 2 picks in this draft at 13 and 22. Not going to use either of those picks on Ryan Nembhard most likely, but they are looking at Nembhard. Maybe if he goes undrafted to potentially sign him. This workout was earlier, kind of before Nembhard was showing up on more mock drafts, so it's possible that was why they looked at him there. But Ryan's getting these opportunities, getting these chances to work out in front of scouts, in front of team personnel, like we said. And I think that this is, as long as he continues to do well, which there's very little doubt that he won't impress with his maturity, with his talent, with his ability to showcase himself in individual workouts, in scrimmages, in 3-on-3 settings, whatever setting they're throwing him in. I have no doubt that Ryan's going to come out of it looking very, very good and should continue to boost his draft stock with his performance in these workouts. We weren't surprised to see Ryan Nembhard getting some individual team workouts. A little bit more surprised to see Ben Gregg show up on the list for the Portland Trail Blazers, but of all the teams to bring in Ben Gregg for a workout, certainly Portland makes a ton of sense. Ben, of course, started at Clackamas High School, just down the road from Portland, before he came to Spokane for the Gonzaga Bulldogs, where he spent 5 years of his career. So very, very cool homecoming, very cool opportunity for him to don some Blazers gear and get that workout. That workout was also on Tuesday, by the way, so already happened for Ben, and we're incredibly excited. He got to work out alongside 5 other players. That would be Cam Hildreth from Wake Forest, Jamian Neal from Creighton, Caleb Grill from Missouri, Damari Monsanto from UT San Antonio, and then Mohamed Diawara, an international big as well. All of these players are not showing up on mock drafts. Caleb Grill's the only one that I think I've even ever seen on a mock draft at this point. So this is clearly the Blazers bringing in some undrafted free agent type players. And it makes sense. The Blazers only have 1 pick in this upcoming draft, and it's at number 11 overall. None of these guys are remotely in the conversation for a lottery pick this year. So the Blazers are just looking for who are some guys we can sign with if they don't get picked in the NBA draft, who are some guys we can invite to Summer League, who are some guys that we maybe could find some hidden gems, some diamonds in the rough, and potentially get these guys. And, instead of having to use a 2nd-round pick, we can get these guys out of the undrafted pool and potentially make some noise with them there. So really cool stuff for Ben. I'm so excited for him. And one thing that really stands out to me about this is Ben could get an opportunity to play for the Rip City Remix, which the Rip City Remix are the G League affiliate of the Portland Trail Blazers, and they play their home games at the Chiles Center. And Ben has always played well at the Chiles Center. Every time Gonzaga played Portland in Portland, Ben Gregg had a big game. His family was in town. If you followed his dad on social media, particularly on Twitter, every game for the last couple of years, he would post a picture of Ben Gregg from various points in his childhood as kind of like hey, it's game day. Here's a fun photo of Ben. So many of those photos were at the Chiles Center when Ben was 10, 9, 12, something like that. All times, by the way, that I was in college made me feel quite old when I would see those pictures and be like, oh, there's Kelly Olynyk in the background. Regardless, Ben has been going to the Chiles Center to root on the Zags forever. He then got the chance to play at the Chiles Center for the Zags and dominated last year. If you recall his final game at the Chiles Center, he had 24 points on perfect 10 of 10 shooting, the first perfect game from the field with 10 or more attempts in Gonzaga basketball history. And it came from big old Ben Gregg at the Chiles Center. So we know he loves the Chiles Center. If he got signed to Rip City and got to play for the Remix, he might be one of the best players on that team simply because he's playing at a place he loves at the Chiles Center. Right now, there's no known workouts for either Caleb Battle or Nolan Hickman. That does not mean that they are not in the process of scheduling workouts with teams. That does not mean that they have not already had workouts with teams. They're not always reported. They're not always made public. So it's not necessarily something we're always going to be aware of. I would be very surprised if those guys don't get invited to a handful of different workouts. They both had a pro day opportunity in Los Angeles not that long ago. So we know that they are working out for teams and scouts and getting eyeballs on them. I expect both these guys will not get drafted, but I do think they will both get signed to summer league deals if that's what they choose to do. I think Caleb Battle in particular is the kind of player who might absolutely ball out in summer league because that style where nobody's really played with each other and there's not a lot of team continuity and there's coaching, but there's not like, they're not running a bunch of sets or anything. It's kind of a free for all. That's the kind of style of basketball where Caleb Battle thrives. A little bit more concerned about what that might mean for Nolan Hickman, who doesn't, I don't think his play style thrives in that system as much, but I still don't think either of these guys are NBA guys necessarily, but they could get two-way contracts maybe, or they could get opportunities to play in the G League. And if they play well there, as we saw with Drew Timme last year, sometimes that's enough to get you an invite up to the big club and a chance to prove yourself towards the end of the regular season. We'll continue to cover all four of these guys as the draft draws nearer and nearer. But right now we're going to move on. We're going to talk about a WCC team that we don't really give a lot of airtime to very often, Steve Lavin and the San Diego Toreros. They've avoided the transfer portal pretty much all of Lavin's tenure until this year. And the program's latest edition, it might be their biggest one yet. More on that to close on the show coming up in just a second. All right, folks, segment 3, still Andy Patton, still Locked On Zags podcast. Closing out the show, it is WCC Wednesday. And so for WCC Wednesday, instead of giving you a transfer portal update across the conference or focusing on something more specific, we are going to talk about San Diego. Not something we do very often, like we said, but San Diego's had a pretty intriguing offseason and an offseason very different from the offseasons we've seen in the last half decade under Coach Steve Lavin. And I felt like that was worthy of some late show conversation. And it's spearheaded by their most recent move, which happened on Monday. They inked a commitment from Ty-Laur Johnson, Ty-Laur, by the way, not how anybody would have guessed that you would spell that name. Ty-Laur Johnson, a transfer from Wake Forest, who at the time of his commitment to San Diego was considered the 7th best available player in the transfer portal. That's a big deal. Yes, we are at a point in time where the 7th best player available in the transfer portal is not typically who you would expect to see as the 7th best player. I'm not going to say that Ty-Laur Johnson is one of the 10, 15, 20, 30, 50, 100 best players overall who is in the transfer portal. I don't think that he is, but he's a pretty good player and a pretty good addition for a team that, frankly, has been a little dearth of talent over the last couple of years. Ty-Laur Johnson's a 6-foot junior guard who spent 1 year at Louisville and then transferred to Wake Forest last year. So last year he was teammates with both Efton Reed and Hunter Salas, of course, two former Zags who were playing for Steve Forbes and the Demon Deacons. And Ty-Laur Johnson was a guy who came over from Louisville with some promise. At Louisville as a freshman in the 23-24 season, which was that last just fully disastrous year for the Cardinals under Coach Kenny Payne before Pat Kelsey took over. But Ty-Laur Johnson started 8 out of 30 games. He played 23.5 minutes per game for the Cardinals, and he averaged just under 9 points, 3.5 assists, about 2 boards, and 1.5 steals. Now, he wasn't very efficient. He was under 20% from 3, under 45% on his 2-pointers. But anybody who averages 9 points per game for an ACC school as a freshman, I think you feel like, hey, there's some upside here. There's some real opportunity for this player to kind of blossom into something. And then he goes to Wake Forest, and Wake Forest has a really strong reputation with transfer portal guards. Not just Hunter Salas, who, of course, ballooned into a very, very good player his junior year, his first year at Wake Forest, but Jake LaRavia, Tyree Appleby before that. They've had a few others who were guys who transferred to Wake Forest and immediately became all ACC players or NBA players or both in some cases. And I remember thinking, hey, Ty-Laur Johnson's next. You know, a guy 9 points per game as a freshman at Louisville, a program that was in complete disarray. Now he's going to Wake Forest. Steve Forbes going to give him the keys to the kingdom. He's going to come in and absolutely tear it up and be a great player. Well, that did not happen. Johnson could not get could not carve a significant role. He started 19 out of 29 games, but only played 23 and a half minutes per game, which is not bad, but he never really took over that lead guard role, in part because Hunter Salas came back to school and was taking on that lead guard role, but in part because the efficiency that was an issue for him as a freshman very much so remained an issue for him as a sophomore. Last year for Wake Forest, Johnson averaged 6 points, a little under 3 assists, about 2 boards, 1.5 steals, just 41% on 2-point attempts, 24% from 3, which is not good, but is a significant increase from where he was at Louisville. That's only on 2 attempts per game. So he's not much of a 3-point shooter, not much of an efficient scorer. He's a great free throw shooter, which is kind of the best thing we can say about him offensively. But he's also a very willing scorer. He's attacks the rim. He likes to go hard. He's a reckless player in some ways, but he's got a lot of talent. And I think that Steve Lavin utilizing the transfer portal is something that we want to keep an eye on. Does it mean they're going to start competing with Gonzaga? No, probably not. In the 1 year before Gonzaga leaves for the Pac-12, I don't think so. But I'm kind of glad to see Steve Lavin at least embracing the transfer portal, because he wouldn't do that. For the first 3 years he was the coach, he was continually bringing in full classes of freshmen and some junior college guys, but almost entirely he'd add 7, 8, 9 new freshmen every year. And then the 3 or 4 of them that ended up being the best would transfer. And then the next year he'd bring in 3, 4, 5 different freshmen. A couple of them would pop, they would transfer, and he would just keep repeating the process. And it was not working. They were not getting out of the cellar. They still haven't really been they haven't finished anywhere of note really in the WCC under Lavin's tenure. And it was because they kept losing talent to the transfer portal, but they weren't replenishing it with anything other than freshmen. And even if those freshmen were good, if your roster is 2 to 3 good freshmen, 1 to 2 good JUCO guys, and then a bunch of freshmen on the bench, you just don't have the depth to compete in a league like the WCC. And again, they lose Tony Duckett from last year's team to St. Mary's. They lose Steven Jamerson from last year's team to UCLA. Santiago Truitt goes to Arizona State. And then 2 years ago, Kevin Patton Jr., who was a really good freshman for them, he transferred to USC. So they just keep losing talented players, and they weren't really replenishing them with any kind of veteran experience. Now they are. Not only do they bring in Ty-Laur Johnson, who, like we said, is a junior guard who has 2 years of experience at different ACC programs, but he's one of many transfers they're bringing in that I kind of like. They got Hassan Diop coming over from Colorado, 6'10" junior, who averaged about 4 points, 4 rebounds in 17 starts last year. They got Juanse Gorosito coming over from Ball State, 6'1" senior who averaged 9 points, shot 41% from 3 last year for Ball State. Gorosito also spent his first 2 years of his career at Portland, where he averaged about 8 points and shot 37% from 3. So a guy who's familiar with the conference, who's a senior, who's got some experience. They also get Tim Moore from NJIT, a 6'6" senior who averaged 13 points and 7 boards, along with 1.5 blocks per game last year. He also shot 36.5% from 3. Tanari Lane from Georgia State, 6'5" senior who averaged 14 points, 1.5 assists, shot 35% from 3 on nearly 8 3-point attempts per game for Tanari Lane. And then their last addition, Dominique Ford, a 6'4" senior transfer from Southern Utah, who was one of the leading scorers in the WAC last year, 14.5 points, a little under 3 boards, 32% from 3, but that was on 6 3-point attempts per game. So you got 3 guys coming in who averaged in double figures last year. You got multiple guys who shot a lot of 3-point attempts last year, a few guys who shot really well from 3. You got a big man who can rebound the heck out of the ball in Hassan Diop. Like, you got some real talent joining this roster. The question now, can Coach Lavin find a way to bring these pieces all together? Because he hasn't really had to do that yet. He's brought in freshman classes, and yes, some of the same challenges you get there are going to show up, but now bringing in, multiple guys who are gunners, who love to shoot threes. You bring in multiple guys who, are seniors, but are coming from different places. Like, how does a guy from Georgia State translate as, compared to a guy from Wake Forest? Like, these are challenges that a lot of other programs have kind of already experienced and gone through because they've been, reloading their rosters via the transfer portal. And again, the Toreros haven't really had to do that yet. So I'm interested to see how this all comes together for Coach Lavin. Noticeably for me, the first thing that stands out is they have a lot of guards who love to score the basketball, but who all average like under 2 assists per game. I don't know if they have enough facilitators. I don't know if they have a guy who can kind of, and maybe Lavin's got somebody in mind who can really get the offense going and look to set up their teammates to score. Because if they have a bunch of dudes who want the ball in their hands and want to shoot and score a lot, that's not going to work. So it's something I'm interested in. Do I think San Diego finishes higher than 8th in the WCC? Probably not. But I'm more inclined to pick them there than I am to pick them at 11. and that's a good thing, or 12, I guess, in this point with Seattle U joining. So I'm intrigued. I'm intrigued to see what this means for San Diego. I'm intrigued if it does work in the sense that they are a little bit better this year, if Coach Lavin will start using the portal a little bit more. Again, for Gonzaga's sake, it's not a huge deal because they're not going to be super competitive this year. They're only playing them once, and then Gonzaga will be off to the Pac-12. But it's kind of fun to see a program trying something different, and I'm curious to see if this will work for this San Diego team that has been just rooted in mediocrity for, frankly, decades in the WCC. Going to wrap it up for me today here in the Locked On Zags podcast. Thank you so much to those of you who have made this show your first listen or your first watch of the day. Like I said, I'll be back with you all on Thursday, getting you ready for the NBA Finals Game 1 on Thursday evening between Chet Holmgren and the Oklahoma City Thunder and Andrew Nembhard and the Indiana Pacers. We'll talk about that series, the matchups, the players, all that coming your way later this week. Thanks again, folks. Have a fantastic rest of your day. And of course, as always, go Zags.